I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are holding an ancient text right in your hands.
It's a very fragile one, probably.
Yeah, exactly. A physical manuscript that is, thousands of years old.
Yeah.
But as you start to read it, the hair on the back of your neck just stands up.
Because it doesn't sound ancient at all.
Right. It reads like a completely modern, cutting critique of, corporate leadership, societal inequality, political corruption.
Oh, absolutely.
And yet all of this heavy, brutal reality is wrapped up in some of the most beautiful, hope-filled poetry ever written.
It is a genuinely jarring experience to read something so old that feels like it was written, specifically about the world we are walking around in right now.
Yeah.
The text doesn't just describe history, it really diagnoses human nature.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. Today, we are unpacking a massive stack of translations and historical analyses of the Book of Isaiah.
There's a lot to get through.
There really is. We are going to extract its core moral warnings, decode its most famous metaphors, and, discover how this incredibly ancient message of hope and justice applies directly to our modern lives.
And the leadership challenges we face every single day.
Exactly. But to really grasp the weight of what Isaiah is saying, we have to understand the world he was standing in, right?
Yeah, we do. Because this isn't theoretical philosophy happening in a vacuum. The visions of Isaiah occurred during the reigns of 4 specific kings of Judah.
Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah.
Right. And this was a time of massive, truly terrifying global upheaval.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because having that context is everything.
Yeah.
When you say terrifying global upheaval, what are we actually talking about for, the average person living in Judah at that time?
We are talking about the Assyrian Empire.
Okay.
Assyria was the unstoppable, brutal superpower of the ancient world. They weren't just an army, they were a highly efficient war machine.
Like a juggernaut.
Completely. They specialized in psychological terror and total siege warfare. They were systematically swallowing up surrounding nations.
Wow.
And Judah is just sitting there, watching the dominoes fall, essentially waiting for the other shoe to drop, which it eventually does, culminating in the Assyrian king Sennacherib completely surrounding Jerusalem.
So the kings of Judah aren't just managing, like, a quiet bureaucracy.
No, not at all.
They are operating inside a geopolitical pressure cooker where one wrong move means the total annihilation of their people.
Which is why the book of Isaiah is fundamentally a massive critique of how power is wielded during a crisis.
Because before a society collapses from the outside, its leadership usually fractures from the inside.
Exactly. The rot starts at the top.
Let's look at those fractures, because Isaiah gives us some really stark contrasts in how different kings handled that ultimate pressure cooker.
Let's start with King Ahaz. In chapter 7, Ahaz gets word that a military alliance is forming against him.
Right, Yenim and Ephraim.
Right. 2 neighboring powers are trying to force Judah into a coalition against Assyria. And the text describes Ahaz's reaction with this brilliant, just devastating piece of psychology.
What does it say?
It says his heart was moved, and the heart of his people, as the trees of the forest are moved with the wind.
Wait, let me stop you there. Because Aram and Ephraim forming an alliance sounds impressive, but what does that actually mean for the guy on the throne? Why would a coalition make a king shake like a tree in the wind?
Because Ahaz knows he's trapped. If he joins the coalition, Assyria crushes him. If he fights the coalition, his neighbors crush him. He has absolutely no good option.
So he's just paralyzed.
Yeah, the text focuses on his internal state, which is just pure panic. He has no grounding. And because the leader is shaking, the anxiety infects the entire organization.
The whole nation shakes with him.
Exactly. It's the ultimate cascading panic.
But then Isaiah shows us a completely different model of leadership later in the text, right?
Yes. With King Hezekiah in chapters 36 and 37, Hezekiah is facing an even worse nightmare than Ahaz.
Because the Assyrians are actually there.
Right. The Assyrian commander, Rabshakeh, is literally at the city gates.
Yeah.
He is shouting taunts at the people on the wall, telling them their God won't save them.
Just brutal.
He's detailing the utter destruction Assyria has brought to every other nation. It's an absolute masterclass in psychological warfare.
How does Hezekiah handle that? Because, human instinct is to either lash out impulsively or just completely shut down.
Right, fight or flight. But Hezekiah does neither. He doesn't panic like Ahaz.
What does he do?
The text says he tears his clothes and puts on sackcloth, which is, an honest physical acknowledgement of grief and terror. But then he goes into the house of the Lord.
He grounds himself.
Yes, and crucially, he sends for wise counsel. He seeks out Isaiah the prophet. He looks for wisdom outside of his own terrified echo chamber. And Isaiah tells him, "Be not afraid of the words that thou hast heard." And Hezekiah finds this profound stillness in the face of total annihilation.
That contrast is incredible. The panicked leader who destabilizes the whole nation versus the leader who acknowledges the terror, slows down, and actively seeks external wisdom.
It's a huge difference, but Isaiah's critique doesn't stop at the king. He goes after the entire ruling apparatus.
Yeah, he completely dismantles the elites.
He calls the princes rebellious and companions of thieves. He says, "Everyone loveth bribes and followeth after rewards."
It's just total corruption.
In chapter 3, he says the leadership is so degraded that it's as if petulant children and impulsive babes are ruling over the people.
Yikes.
And in chapter 28, there is this graphic, tragic image of the priests and the prophets staggering and reeling from strong drink. They are confused because of wine, and they totter in judgment.
So they are completely incapacitated, intoxicated by literal wine, but also clearly intoxicated by their own power and status.
Exactly.
That brings up an analogy that really stuck out to me in chapter 1. Isaiah says in verse 22, "Thy silver is become dross."
Yes, that's a famous one.
Now, dross is the scummy residue that gets left behind when you smelt metal.
Right.
But it's also the cheap filler material, right?
That's the key. In ancient metallurgy, corrupt silversmiths would mix cheaper base metals, the dross, into the pure silver to stretch their profits.
Right, and dross doesn't happen overnight. It happens when you melt the metal down to reshape it, and you let that cheap filler material slip into the vat to save a few bucks.
It's a slow degradation.
Exactly. On the outside, the silver bar looks exactly the same. It weighs the same. It shines the same. But the moment you put real weight or stress on it,
It snaps.
it snaps.
Yeah.
That is such a perfect mechanism for explaining modern corporate culture rot.
Oh, absolutely.
You see these institutions that used to be the absolute gold standard. But through 1,000 tiny compromises, leaders prioritizing short-term gains or taking the metaphorical bribes of their own ego, the culture degrades.
The silver becomes dross.
So from a modern leadership perspective, how does Isaiah suggest an organization recovers when the structural integrity is just gone?
Well, Isaiah demands a deeply uncomfortable truth here. You cannot just polish dross.
You can't just run an internal PR campaign.
Right, you can't just change the company logo and hope the silver becomes strong again. It has to be purged.
Which means taking it back to the fire.
It's an agonizing process. The text explicitly says in chapter 1, "I will turn my hand upon thee, and purge away thy dross as with lye, and will take away all thine alloy."
Wow. Purge away as with lye. That is harsh.
Very. The restoration only comes after the impurities are literally burned away. Only then does it say, "I will restore thy judges as at the first, and thy counselors as at the beginning."
So real recovery requires a painful, fundamental removal of the corrupt elements.
There are absolutely no shortcuts in Isaiah's framework.
But if you're going to purge the corrupt leaders, if you have to scrape away the dross, there's going to be massive collateral damage.
Inevitably.
Who actually suffers while the elites are busy intoxicating themselves with power and running the system into the ground? It's usually not the guys in the boardroom.
It is never the guys in the boardroom. The people who pay the heaviest price are always the most vulnerable.
Right.
Isaiah uses a brilliant, labor-intensive agricultural metaphor to explain exactly who gets crushed in that collateral damage. This is the famous vineyard metaphor in chapter 5.
Walk us through the mechanics of that metaphor, because I know ancient viticulture is a lot more intense than just, throwing some seeds in the dirt.
Oh, it was backbreaking labor. The text frames it almost like a tragic love song. The owner of the vineyard, representing God, does everything perfectly.
He puts in the work.
Yes. He plants the choicest vine, which represents the people of Judah. He clears the heavy stones by hand. He builds a watchtower for protection. He hews a wine vat straight out of the solid bedrock.
Wow.
The expectation is clear. After all that investment, he expects good, sweet grapes.
But the text says it brought forth wild grapes. The Hebrew word is bi'ushim. What does that actually mean?
It means stinking, worthless things.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, these aren't just slightly sour grapes. They are rotten, offensive yields. The tragedy here is the betrayal of the investant.
Right. The owner provided the perfect structure for a thriving, healthy society, but the resulting culture was incredibly toxic.
Precisely.
Let's ground this in reality, though. He's not talking about actual farming. What does a society producing rotten fruit look like?
Whoa.
Like, how exactly does a corrupt elite class practically harm the everyday person?
The wild grapes represent a society that has weaponized its systems against the marginalized. Isaiah makes the baseline of a healthy society crystal clear in chapter 1.
Was the baseline.
He says, "Seek justice, relieve the oppressed, judge the fatherless, plead for the widow. That is the sweet fruit."
Okay, I see.
But instead, the corrupt judges are so focused on bribes that the text says they judge not the fatherless, neither doth the cause of the widow come unto them.
So this isn't just about bad people doing generically bad things. It's a structural critique.
Exactly. It's about the system itself.
Because in that ancient patriarchal culture, if a widow or an orphan doesn't have a male advocate, they have zero legal standing, right?
None at all. They have no property rights.
So if a judge requires a bribe just to hear a case, and the widow has no capital, she legally loses her land. She starves.
Yes. The text is describing a legal system that has been monetized to the point of weaponization against the very people it was built to protect.
That is just brutal.
And that is the insidious part. It's systemic starvation disguised as legal procedure. The system is entirely closed off to the people who need it most.
So if the legal system is completely broken and monetized, how do these leaders justify themselves? Do they know they are the bad guys?
Oh, they absolutely do not think they are the bad guys.
Really? Because Chapter 1 gets really intense about their religious practices.
Yeah, in fact, they thought they were being highly religious and very successful. But God tells them he is absolutely weary of their endless sacrifices, their incense, their solemn assemblies.
He's just done with it.
He says, "When you make many prayers, I will not hear." Why? Because your hands are full of blood.
Wow. It's the ultimate critique of empty performative aesthetics. It really reminds me of modern performative activism.
There are a lot of parallels there.
You have a massive institution with a terrible exploitative supply chain or a toxic internal culture that just crushes its employees, but they throw millions of dollars at a shiny philanthropic gala to look good to the public.
Exactly.
Isaiah is basically shouting across the centuries, don't put a shiny PR campaign over a toxic supply chain. But let me push back on this for a second.
Sure.
Is the text suggesting that all these religious rituals, the assemblies, the incense, are they inherently bad? Like, is Isaiah anti-religion?
No, and that is a crucial distinction. It's not that the rituals themselves are inherently evil, it's that rituals are meant to be an outward expression of an inward reality. When the inward reality is corrupt, when your legal system is crushing the orphan and ignoring the widow, using religious or institutional rituals to cover that up isn't just useless. The text calls it an abomination.
An abomination, wow.
It becomes an insult. Isaiah is demanding alignment. You cannot claim to honor the divine while simultaneously destroying the humanity of your neighbors.
Right.
Justice for the vulnerable is the absolute prerequisite for any meaningful ritual.
Wash you, make you clean, cease to do evil. It's very binary.
It really is.
Okay, so let's take stock of where we are. The legal system is weaponized. The leaders are corrupt and panicking. The vineyard is producing rotten fruit. And the terrifying Assyrian war machine is right outside the walls.
It is incredibly bleak.
Extremely. How on earth do we get from this destroyed, barren landscape to any sense of hope? Because Isaiah is widely considered one of the most hopeful texts in human history.
The genius of Isaiah is that he doesn't ignore the ruins, but he refuses to leave the listener there.
Oh.
The looming destruction, the invasions by Assyria, and eventually Babylon, they are not framed as meaningless, chaotic suffering. They are framed as that harsh, agonizing, but necessary pruning we talked about earlier.
Right. Remember the dross. The fire has a specific purpose.
Exactly, to melt down the corrupt alloy and get the pure silver back.
Right.
In chapter 18, the text describes how before the harvest, the useless sprigs will be cut off with pruning hooks. It's violent. But that painful pruning is the only way to reach the massive psychological paradigm shift that hits in chapter 40.
Chapter 40. That opens with those famous, deeply moving words, right? Comfort ye, my people.
Yes.
But wait, comfort?
Yeah.
How do you preach comfort to a society that is literally watching its cities be leveled by an empire?
It's hard to imagine.
How does a culture hold on to a vision of a perfect future when their present reality is burning to the ground?
That is the radical nature of prophetic hope.
Yeah.
Isaiah isn't offering a naive denial of reality. He is giving a traumatized people a vocabulary for life after the trauma.
Life after the trauma.
He promises that the debt is paid off, that though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. It's a shift from structural judgment to unimaginable grace.
And he introduces some major prophetic themes to anchor that hope, right? Things that go way beyond just surviving the next battle.
Oh, definitely. He outlines a vision of leadership and peace that is almost impossible to comprehend for a people living through constant war. He speaks of a shoot out of the stock of Jesse.
Hold on, for anyone who isn't, a massive ancient history buff, who is Jesse, and why does a shoot coming out of his stock represent hope?
Great question. Jesse was the father of King David, so the stock or stump of Jesse represents the royal lineage of Judah.
Ah, okay.
Isaiah is painting a picture where the great proud tree of Judah's leadership has been completely chopped down by these empires. There is nothing left but a dead stump.
Just totally leveled.
Right. But from that seemingly dead wood, a tiny, fragile green shoot emerges. It's the ultimate underdog metaphor.
I love that.
This new leader won't judge by what his eyes see or what his ears hear. He won't be swayed by bribes or outward appearances, but he will bring a spirit of true wisdom, understanding, and perfect justice for the poor.
So he is the exact anti-Ahaz, the pure silver leader.
Precisely. And from there, the visions expand to a staggering cosmic scale. In the later chapters, like chapter 25, Isaiah writes about a day when death itself will be swallowed up forever.
Wow.
He says the Lord will wipe away tears from off all faces. Think about the magnitude of that promise to a mother who just lost a child to an Assyrian siege.
It's just breathtaking.
And in chapter 65, he speaks of the creation of new heavens and a new earth where the sound of weeping and crying will simply cease to exist.
It is a vision of ultimate, complete restoration. But here's the question for you, the listener, today. It is beautiful, transcendent poetry. But if we're sitting here in our modern lives dealing with our own microcrises, corrupt systems, and information overload, how do we actually engage with this?
That is the big question.
What I find so compelling is that Isaiah's definition of hope isn't passive. He isn't saying, just sit around in the ashes and wait for the new heavens and the new earth to magically appear.
No, not at all.
In chapter 58, he gives a masterclass on how to actually access this hope right now.
He demands active participation in the repair of the world.
Yes. He says that true healing springs forth speedily, not when you just fast or pray, but when you take away from the midst of the yoke and when you stop speaking wickedness.
Hope is a verb here.
Exactly. If you want to see the light break forth like the morning, you have to stop exploiting the people under you. You have to remove the heavy yokes you've placed on others. You access the profound comfort of Isaiah by aligning your daily personal actions with justice.
When you look at the whole picture we've explored today, the book of Isaiah gives us the absolute extremes of the human condition.
Yeah, it really does.
We see the terrifying geopolitical panic that makes leaders shake like leaves. We see the slow, insidious decay of institutions as the silver turns to cheap dross.
We see the bitter tragedy of the wild grapes, whereas society goes through the motions of looking good, throwing PR campaigns and solemn assemblies, while structurally weaponizing its systems to starve the widows and the orphans.
But we also see the promise that the fire isn't just destruction, it's purification.
Right.
The painful pruning leads to a blossoming wilderness, to scarlet sins turning white as snow, and to a tiny green shoot of perfect justice growing out of a dead stump.
It is a massive, overwhelming text. But before we wrap up, we want to leave you with one final, lingering concept from the very end of Isaiah.
Because in a world with massive systemic problems, corrupt institutions, and looming global threats, the default state for a lot of people right now is feeling like they're just too small to matter.
It is incredibly easy to feel insignificant.
But in Isaiah chapter 60, verse 22, there is this quiet, explosive promise.
What does it say?
It says, "The smallest shall become 1,000, and the least a mighty nation."
Wow. The smallest shall become 1,000.
If you take Isaiah's ancient framework seriously, your scale does not dictate your impact. Your smallest, quietest act of justice, standing up for someone who is being marginalized in your office, refusing to participate in a tiny compromise of your personal integrity, or just offering real comfort to someone who is grieving, that tiny action isn't swallowed up by the darkness.
It has divine potential.
Exactly. It has the potential to become a mighty nation of change.
So the question this ancient text leaves you with is this. What is the absolute smallest seed of justice you can plant in your own vineyard today?
That is a perfect question to carry with you.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope it gave you some powerful new lenses to look through. Keep questioning, keep learning, and enjoy the rest of your day.